Hello and welcome to The Impact. I'm Mike McClanahan. The Washington Attorney General is the highest legal officer in the state. As an agency leader, the AG directs a team of several hundred attorneys and has a broad and diverse set of responsibilities. The State Attorney General is in charge of representing state agencies, state officials, and defending state laws in court, providing legal opinions to state government officials or local prosecutors, enforcing the Consumer Protection Act, writing ballot measure descriptions, and occasionally prosecuting criminal cases upon request from a local prosecutor or the governor. This fall, 2 attorneys are competing for the title of Attorney General. Interestingly, Democratic candidate Nick Brown and Republican candidate Pete Serrano have also faced off in court during litigation involving state gun restrictions. Nick Brown is a partner with Pacifica Law Group and a former U.S. attorney. He served as general counsel to Governor Jay Inslee. Before that, he was an assistant U.S. attorney and a JAG officer in the Army. Pete Serrano is the mayor of Pasco and has been on the council since 2017. He's a former environmental attorney for the U.S. Department of Energy at Hanford and a project supervisor and attorney for Energy Northwest. He's director and general counsel for the Silent Majority Foundation, a legal organization he co-founded in 2021. Joining me now, Nick Brown and Pete Serrano. Thank you both for being here. I'm going to start alphabetically here. So Nick, let's start with you. What qualities and experiences do you possess that would make you a good candidate for such an important job here in Washington?
Well, thank you for having us both on. I think when people are electing the next Attorney General, they're looking for someone with the right legal experience, leadership experience, and values to lead one of the most important agencies in the state of Washington. And I think when people take a look at my background, having started my legal career as an Army lawyer, served on both sides of the aisle, as a criminal lawyer, served as an assistant United States attorney for the Department of Justice, where I did hundreds of cases tackling the fentanyl crisis, tackling drug crimes and gun crimes, complex corporate crime. And then I've served down here in Olympia, working for the governor on complex law and policy issues. So a really broad legal resume and experience doing tough, complicated cases. And then as a leader, I've led big public law firm before, serving as the United States attorney for a couple of years here in Western Washington. Those qualities, I think, really prepared me to take on this responsibility. It's a very important one. And I also think that my values and priorities reflect where Washington State is. So I'm excited about the opportunity to talk about those issues in this campaign and believe it really prepares me uniquely for this job.
So, same question. Pete, what experiences, what qualities and attributes would you bring that make you an ideal candidate for this job?
Yeah, again, like Nick, I appreciate you having us both on, especially here together. I think it's great that when we get to hear from each other. I think we've gotten to know each other's backgrounds. For me, it's a couple of things. As the current mayor of Pasco, I've been on city council for 7 years. I moved up here 9 years ago, got entrenched in my community such that they elected me to a position, the highest position now as the mayor in the city of Pasco, because I've shown the values of public safety. I've shown the values of working with our entire body of city council to do what's right for my local jurisdiction. I'm going to apply the same principles of fairness and equality and opportunity as Attorney General. I've also stood for the individual rights, small business owners, as we saw over the past several years. A lot of those folks got hammered with a lot of unfair declarations that they were either unessential or non-essential. Everybody's essential, and as Attorney General, I'll reflect that in my day-to-day. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to stand and bring that experience. I've led multi-billion-dollar projects, cross-sectional, where we've had anywhere from 30 to 50 people working on it, on various types of folks, whether it's engineers, lawyers, or consultants. And I've led as a supervisor and a manager of those types of projects. So I've got the background of leadership, both as elected and as someone who's getting paid to do the job. And I think those just general common values of bringing the people to the front is going to really shine forth with me as the next Attorney General.
So in terms of your plans for the office, if voters send you to Olympia in November, what would be your top 3 priorities for, just going into the job?
Sure. Well, I think, top of mind for voters wherever I go across the state is how do we keep people safe? We have real problems with gun violence here in Washington, with the fentanyl crisis that's really ravaging our communities, particularly young people. We have real problems with public safety, and safety also includes protecting people from discrimination and hate in their communities. And so making sure that we're doing everything we can to use that office, working with local law enforcement in the community, working with the legislature, trying to find new and creative ways to take on some of these challenges. That's going to be issue number one for me. There are big issues of protecting our democracy and our freedoms here in Washington, and the AG plays a real innovative role. And I feel fundamentally that the job of the Attorney General is to be the people's lawyer and to be their advocate and make sure that they're not being taken advantage of by governments or corporations, and protecting their ability to have, prosperous opportunities here in Washington. And I really want to do everything we can to use that position to advocate for the people, to make this a better place to live. We have really severe economic inequities here, housing crises, and I think the AG's office can be a partner with many different agencies to lead the state forward, to make sure we're reducing some of the strains that people are feeling in their communities. And that office has so many different ways that they can intersect there and do good work on behalf of the people, and I'm excited about taking it on.
Okay, same question. What would be your top priorities for the office?
Yeah, the top three for me are safety, transparency, and bringing the Constitution in the forefront and protecting the individual rights that are enshrined through those. And so the long form answer to that is safety. We do know that the fentanyl crisis is out there. We do know that the AG has the opportunity to either sue organizations. We've seen Mr. Ferguson use the opioid crisis. He's got some settlements where even in Pasco, we've received some funds where we're able to provide treatment opportunities. I think the AG has the opportunity to not only lead from the civil side, that is recovering funds to bring it back to the communities that are disrupted through this, but he also has the opportunity to set the tone for prosecutions, whether it's telling the legislature, hey, you want to make this decriminalized or a lower penalty. We can't do that because it will harm our citizens. Working with the United States Attorney, working with local prosecutors and sheriffs and police chiefs to say, hey, look, I'll prioritize making sure your agencies are supported. That's what public safety means to me, whether it's grant funding or putting body count in there through the AG's office. We want to make sure that we say safety first. That's where it's going to go. As a transparency, I think the Public Records Act system in the Attorney General's office, it's outdated, I'll say, which is probably the most polite way I can say it. As someone who's requested records, I have to send a check, and then I either get a CD-ROM, I don't know what computer still has those, or I get a thumb drive. I think there's a lot of way to expedite those. And then also when I get information from the AG's office, it's redacted significantly, 90+%. I see the header, I know it comes from the Attorney General's office, and I see the sincerely line. That's not adequate for our people. They absolutely deserve the right to know what's happening in their government. And then putting the Constitution first, I think it's real simple. Advising agencies and the legislatures, this is your box within the Constitution. I will have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, Constitution of Washington, and the laws. When the laws conflict with either of those constitutions, we need to have a serious sit-down discussion as to which one supersedes. And my office, I look forward to taking people that agree with me and disagree with me, putting them together and saying, what's the best legal advice for this agency or the legislature?
Is there one area of policy where the AG's office would have, where you would be more involved than previous administrations, or what that voters would see something different than they've seen before if you're elected?
Yeah, well, I think there's been a lot of great work over the last 12 years here in the Attorney General's office, and really continuing a pattern of really positive leadership in Olympia from the Attorney General's office. And I've interfaced and worked with a lot of the prior Attorney Generals, Rob McKenna, Chris Gregoire, Bob Ferguson, and I've seen each of them build on some new successes. Over the last 12 years, there's a couple things that really stand out for me as positive new developments. Bob and his team created a civil rights division for the first time in the agency's history, defending people's civil rights. They've created an environmental enforcement protection to make sure we're prioritizing keeping our environment clean and healthy and holding people accountable that abuse our environment. My background is entirely different than Bob Ferguson's. It's entirely different than Pete's. And so each of us is going to bring our own experience. I think what makes me different from Bob and from Pete in this race is that I have tremendous experience doing the legal work of keeping people safe. I've prosecuted hundreds of cases as a military lawyer, military officer, as an assistant U.S. attorney. I've led big complex investigations, going after people causing harm in my community, working collaboratively across multiple jurisdictions here in Washington. And so I'm going to bring a lot more real life experience as a lawyer doing that work to bear to that job, and make sure that we're empowering the legislature to write smart policy that people understand, that both the law enforcement and the community understands moving forward, and focus more on how do we keep people safe. And in order to do that, I think you have to have the experience of actually doing those cases as a lawyer and doing that hard work, and I hope to lean into that more aggressively moving forward.
Same question, is there an area where voters would see you taking more action than previous administrations if elected?
Yeah, I think it's going to be twofold. I appreciate that Nick mentioned environmental law. That's what I did for 12 years before I opened a nonprofit to stand for individual rights when the government overreached into our daily lives. So I think those are going to be the two areas I can easily focus on. As to environmental law, I've sat on the side where I've sued the United States when the Environmental Protection Agency failed to conduct proper rulemaking. My small organization sued them. I was a young attorney, so I was on the front end of that case, ended up going through the U.S. Court of Appeals and made some significant difference to the way water treatment works. From there, as I mentioned, I sat on multi-billion-dollar port acquisitions where we looked at brownfields and greenfields, which is reuse of contaminated property. I've worked with the scientists to say this doesn't work. This treatment's not effective, or it's too cost prohibitive, or it's untried and not true. So I understand the interplay of, especially as we look at the energy demands of the state, whether it's the transmission lines that we're not going to have through Bonneville Power Administration or your local utilities, whether it's lack of the actual resources of producing energy, we're going to have an energy crisis. We need someone who can lead on that, and I will be able to do so, having spent the past 12 to 15 years of my life fighting those issues, working with communities and making sure they understand we're here to protect you, but we're also here to provide resources. And then as to the civil rights and the individual rights, one thing I do is stand for those who our government has declared non-essential. These individuals were standard workers. They were deemed non-essential by our government, and they had no recourse. They were told, you have to do this because you're not essential to us. I've stood with those people. I've been in the trenches with them. I've put my time and energy into it, and we've won some of those cases. I will stand with these people, whether or not the government wants to deem them essential or not.
On the consumer protection front, there are all sorts of areas where the Attorney General's office is responsible for protecting the people of Washington, whether it's fraud or it could be dangerous products, or there are various different ways that can be, I guess, interpreted. When you think about consumer protection, is there an area that you specifically want to focus on, or one that comes to mind that you see as very important or that stands out?
Well, the Consumer Protection Act and using it aggressively is by far the most common tool the AG's office has to protect people, to improve their lives. And it's a long pattern of attorney generals continuing to build upon that work. And the last 12 years, we've seen some really aggressive cases taken to protect people. And using the Consumer Protection Act protects both individuals and businesses who are also being victims of fraudulent business practices or misleading business practices. And so I want to make sure that we're continuing to be aggressive to hold corporate actors and private actors accountable anytime they're abusing populations. This is particularly true for more vulnerable populations, so senior citizens, veterans communities who are coming in and out of our community, immigrant populations who may not understand the languages that they're being intersecting with. The one area where I really want to focus on moving forward is housing. All across the state, we're facing housing crisis. That's true in Seattle, that's true in Pasco, that's true in Spokane. No matter where we go, there's really, really big problems around housing, and that impacts homelessness, that impacts affordability, and the Consumer Protection Act and the tools of the AG's office, I think, need to be used more aggressively to go after things like price fixing, because we've seen consolidation in the housing market and national housing corporations taking advantage of people. To use the Civil Rights Division to make sure housing is free from discrimination, whether you're renting or buying, and to make sure that we're protecting renters and tenants who don't have as much power in these interactions and these transactions. So housing is going to be a big priority for me to move forward using the Consumer Protection Act and other tools in the agency.
Same question. What aspects of consumer protection do you think really stand out and really need attention? Anything that you would like to focus on?
Yeah, as far as I've seen, I've not seen a lot of the cybercrime and those types of consumer issues. So especially, Nick mentioned our vulnerable populations. That's those who don't have the resources. So they're using borrowed tools maybe to get online, whether it's a computer that they're borrowing from school, going to the library. We have our elderly population who, is typically falling prey to these types of issues where they get a spam bot or something of that nature. I'd really like to see us move forward in the 21st century and 22nd century and make sure that the Attorney General's office is hyper-focused on those types of crimes that are starting, they've budded over the past 10, 15 years. but they're going to be the pervasive issue, especially for those vulnerable citizens. I had a buddy, and I'll tell you this, I don't always agree with Mr. Ferguson or his office, but I had a buddy who, his parents are elderly. They had an issue where they were in a really one-sided contract. I said, call the AG's office. There's a hotline for consumer protection. They'll respond, and hopefully they'll respond. And they did, and they actually were very aggressive, and it got them out of this one-sided contract that would have bound them probably till death or beyond. And so I do think there's some kudos due there, but I do think really turn it into the next generation, again, especially through cyber crimes and cyber bullying, all that sort of stuff. We really need to take that aggressive approach. Even Mr. Ferguson was one of 42 attorneys general who's asking the Surgeon General to put a warning on our use of social media for our children. So I think there's a lot that can be done that they're starting to hit the edge on, and let's carry that forward.
The AG's office has a lot under its purview. We talked consumer protection, defending challenges to state law, advising the legislature or agencies, the governor, representing the state in court, all duties of the AG's office. But that authority and responsibility has been expanded in recent years, whether that is for the cold case task force or the cold case unit for unsolved missing persons and murder cases involving indigenous residents, or the artificial intelligence task force. When you look at the big list of things that there are, which would be your responsibility, are there areas which you would prioritize over others? Which do you see as the core mission of the office?
Well, the core mission is to be the lawyer for the people of the state of Washington. And so, not every state has a separately elected attorney general. Some are appointed by the governor or come into office through other means. But I fundamentally believe that the reason we have a separately elected AG is to fight for the people and to be the people's advocate. So that is how I will orient the office and the plans moving forward. But the bulk of the work, the actual casework, is advising state government and state agencies to make sure that they are operating at the highest level. I'll bring my experience having led a large public law firm as the U.S. attorney and managed 80-some lawyers and a big staff for all of Western Washington to bear to make sure that we're providing the best legal services we can on behalf of the state of Washington. And the AG should be a champion to advocate for better policy here in Washington and work collaboratively with the legislature. It's a huge office with over 800 lawyers now in their FTE positions there, and you have to be able to do multiple things at one time, and having the experience and building a team. When I came in to be U.S. attorney, we created a new strategic plan for the office. I hired all of the new attorneys that were coming to the agency, dealt with staff and a budget, so I know what it's like to do that work as a lawyer and lead a big firm, and that's going to require for the next AG, because the problems that we're going to have and the challenges that the state is facing are going to be there on day one. That's going to be particularly true in my mind if President Trump is reelected, and the challenges that we saw from the last time he was in office and the leadership that AG Ferguson and his team showed here in Washington is going to be vital. But we're going to need to do all those things at the same time, and I think that my experience prepares me for it.
What do you see as the core mission, given the just laundry list of different responsibilities and obligations of the office?
Yeah, I'll go back to the oath. The oath is to uphold the U.S. Constitution, the Constitution and laws of Washington State. If we're not focused on that, we're losing sight of the people. We're losing sight of the purpose of the mission of the office. We're advising these agencies just willy-nilly. What we need to do is bring it to a streamlined process, and like I've mentioned already, what I really look forward to doing is bringing my vision of what the Constitution reads, what the case law reads, what all of the attorneys in our office, not all of them, but both sides of the coin. Let's meet in the middle. Let's figure out what it is when we're advising these agencies. What is their statutory authority? What did the legislature grant them? Why are they as bloated as they are? We've seen this. The agency overreach is significant. It impacts you in every which way. When we look at the questions, there are questions that we have to set forward with the insurance commissioner. Why is it that you're being penalized for your neighbor's car getting stolen? Why are your rates going up? You're not having, I'm not going to speak to your record, but I'm assuming you don't have accidents. I've not gotten tickets. I've not had accidents. Why are my rates going up? Why are the people of Washington being hosed by these outside entities, and we don't have agencies or legislatures standing for them? That's what the Attorney General does. He stands with the people and for the people, and he uses the square corners of the document of the constitutions to really use that as a leaping point. So
we've got a little over 2.5 minutes left. With criminal justice, to go back to that topic, we've sort of touched on it already, but in terms of the AG's actual responsibility and authority, do you think would you support expanding that authority, or do you think that the tools are already there?
Well, there's tools there to deal with a very narrow caseload of actual criminal cases, but anytime there's an opportunity to partner with local jurisdictions to fill voids that they have, to be a resource for them, I'll absolutely jump into that space and make sure that the AG's office can do everything it can. Right now, the criminal division of the AG's office is fairly small because of the type of cases that they do, but that if there's a need to do that with local jurisdictions, we should absolutely do it. And again, one of the principal differences I think between Pete and I is that I've done those cases. Literally hundreds of cases I've prosecuted, led complex grand jury investigations, been in court with victims who have suffered because of crime. I know what it's like, and so when I go to work with prosecutors' offices, I'll bring decades of experience of actual casework with me to do that and be a resource for them, and helping the legislature continue to draft better policy, good policy that gets to some of our root cause problems. That's going to be the type of leadership and experience that we need, and I'm excited about bringing everything I've done over the last 20 years to bear in that position.
So running a little bit low on time here, but same question before we get to closing here. Do you think the office's criminal law enforcement authority should be expanded?
I do think there's opportunity for expansion, but I'll tell you this, having met with both sheriffs and prosecutors, they've told me that Mr. Ferguson's been either delayed or inept or just flat out mum. They've asked for his assistance, and he said, no, that's not my legacy, that's not my approach, I'm not gonna touch this case. Whether or not I agree or disagree, if we have local jurisdictions, prosecutors, sheriffs, and local PDs that need our assistance to make our streets safer, I don't want to sit down with another victim and have to console them. I'm going to do my best to actually represent them and get justice for them and the deceased or whoever it is that's harmed. Let's proactively address this together, and if we need to look at where there's expansion opportunity, we'll see then. But there's opportunity to actually act upon requests that are sitting dormant.
So if you could, with 30 seconds or less, sum up closing remarks, anything I didn't ask, anything you want to add?
Well, there's a lot you didn't ask, but we only had 20 minutes today. But I think, the people are going to have a real stark choice moving forward. Pete and I, we get along well. We actually have a case against each other right now. But there are very different views that we have on our values, our experience, and I hope the voters look closely. And what they'll see is someone who's always fought for the people, has extensive experience working on the matters that most get to the heart of where people's concerns are right now. And there are real distinctions about us moving forward, and we're going to have more debates in the coming weeks, and I look forward to that conversation.
30 seconds to close us out.
I will stand with the people. I will continually stand with them. There's no happenstance that I'm mayor of Pasco. Even a day after I declared for Attorney General, my peers elected me to lead that group because they knew that I could stand for the people of Pasco, that I could stand with them to bring resources, to bring solutions, and that's what I'll bring with me to the Attorney General's office. I will continually be focused on the people, on community service, and making Washington a better place to live. And I will lead that with the Constitution of Washington, United States.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you both very much for your time. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Still ahead, a look at the controversy over new public defender caseload limits before a hearing next week at the state Supreme Court. Stay with us.
There are common sense things that we know we can do to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them.
Who says how many rounds it will take to stop a threat? That's how many you need.
I believe that law is unconstitutional, so I will not enforce it.
The Washington Supreme Court will hold a public hearing on controversial policy changes for public defenders across the state. The September 25th hearing will focus on revised indigent defense caseload limits and support staff requirements approved by the State Bar Association earlier this year. The revised standards would cut the maximum misdemeanor caseload for public defenders in half and slash felony caseload limits by 2/3, while also mandating more support staff. Supporters of the change argue burnout is partly to blame for the shortage of public defenders in Washington, and say current case limits are outdated and don't allow enough time to tackle complicated cases. Opponents of the caseload limits say counties will not be able to hire enough people to meet the need, which will result in active cases being dropped and charges dismissed. TVW will cover the hearing gavel to gavel. Our election coverage continues next week with a look at one of the initiatives on the ballot this fall. Please join us then. Thank you for watching and have a great week.